I never questioned my parents' love until the night I found the baby monitor hidden under my bed. It started with the scratching, a soft, rhythmic noise coming from the walls of my childhood bedroom. I told my mom about it, but she brushed it off, saying it was just the house settling. That didn't explain why it only happened at night. One evening, after dinner, I decided to press my ear against the wall. The scratching was there again, more frantic this time, like something trapped trying to get out. I barely slept, my body stiff under the blankets, waiting for whatever was making that noise to finally break through. The next day, I mentioned it to my dad. He just looked at me, eyes blank, and said, "Stop listening to things you're not supposed to." That answer made my stomach turn. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of my door creaking open. I held my breath, pretending to be asleep. Soft footsteps approached my bed, and for a few agonizing seconds, I felt something or someone standing over me. Then a whisper, not from the walls, not from the air vents, from right above my face. "Go back to sleep." I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't move. I squeezed my eyes shut until I heard the footsteps retreat. When I finally dared to look, my door was open wider than before. My parents' room was at the end of the hallway, their door also ajar. The next morning, my mom acted like nothing happened. I forced myself to eat breakfast, but I could barely swallow. That's when I noticed it. The baby monitor. Not in my parents' room. Not in the nursery for my baby brother. But under my bed. My stomach dropped. I asked my mom about it, my voice shaking. She smiled and said, "We just like to check on you." That was the moment I knew something was deeply, deeply wrong. That night, I took the baby monitor and stuffed it in my closet under a pile of clothes. I waited. At exactly 2 a.m., the scratching in the walls started again. Then, the monitor, still buried under my clothes, crackled to life. Heavy breathing, slow, deep, and deliberate. And then, my mother's voice. "He knows." My heart stopped. A floorboard creaked outside my door. I lunged for the monitor and shut it off, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The hallway light flickered on, and I could hear footsteps approaching. I dove under my covers and forced myself to stay still. My door handle turned, slowly, carefully, like whoever was on the other side didn't want to wake me. The door opened just a crack. I could see a sliver of my mother's face, one eye visible in the dim light. I held my breath. She stood there for what felt like forever before the door clicked shut again. I didn't sleep. The next morning, my parents acted normal. Too normal. I told them I wasn't feeling well and stayed in my room all day, trying to figure out what to do. That night, I pretended to be asleep again. 2 a.m. came, and this time, I heard my parents whispering outside my door. Not words, measuring something. Then, the wall next to my bed let out a soft, hollow thud. My breath hitched. I pressed my hand against the wall. It moved, just slightly, like it wasn't fully attached. Something was behind it. I couldn't stay another night. I packed a bag, grabbed my little brother from his crib, and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my grandmother's house miles away. The police didn't find anything unusual when they checked my room. My parents said I was acting out, that I was unstable, that I needed help, but they never explained the baby monitor. They never explained the whispering. And they sure as hell never explained why, a week after I left, the new family who moved into that house reported hearing scratching in the walls. I don't know what was behind that wall. I don't know what my parents were planning. But I know this. I was never supposed to leave. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that running saved me. But nightmares don't just end because you wake up. After I left, my parents bombarded my grandmother's phone with messages. Some were pleading, asking me to come back. Others were cold, accusing me of overreacting. But one voicemail stood out. It was my mother's voice, but something was off. Her tone was too calm, too measured. "Come home, sweetheart. We need to finish what we started." I deleted the message and tried to move on, but my body wouldn't let me. Every night, I woke up at exactly 2 a.m., drenched in sweat. My ears strained for sounds that weren't there, scratching whispers, the quiet creak of my bedroom door. Even though I was miles away, it was like the house hadn't let me go. And then, the real nightmare began. One evening, while my grandmother was in the kitchen, I took my little brother to his crib. As I pulled the blanket over him, I noticed something on the baby monitor beside his bed. A tiny red light. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and pressed play. Static filled the speaker, but beneath it, I heard breathing. Not my brother's. Not mine. Someone else's then, my mother's voice. "We know where you are." I nearly dropped the monitor. My pulse pounded in my ears. I ran to my grandmother, trying to explain, but by the time we checked again, the monitor was blank, nothing saved, no signs of the recording. I barely slept that night. Every noise, every creak of the house sent my heart racing. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted into a restless sleep. And that's when I heard it, a faint rhythmic scratching. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't coming from the walls this time. It was coming from inside the closet. I swallowed, my throat dry, and sat up. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. My fingers dug into the sheets as I forced myself to listen. Scritch, scritch. Something was behind the door. Something waiting. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't move. And then the doorknob turned. Deliberately, I bolted upright just as the door swung open. Nothing was there. Just darkness. A cold, empty void stretching into the closet. But the scratching hadn't stopped. It had just moved closer. I felt it before I saw it. A slow, creeping presence that pressed against the air itself. And then, in the dim glow of the streetlight outside my window, I saw something move. A handprint. Not on the inside of the door. On my floor, like something had crawled out. I grabbed my brother and ran, my grandmother shouting after me as I tore down the hallway. I didn't stop, not until I was outside, gasping for air, the cold night burning my lungs. The next morning, my grandmother packed our things. We left town without telling my parents. I never went back, but sometimes when I wake up at night, I swear I hear it. The faintest, slowest sound, and I know it's still looking for me. I never thought much about the old baby monitor in our attic until it started working again. My wife and I had bought it years ago when our son, Oliver, was a baby. We stopped using it after he turned 3, and it had been gathering dust ever since. But last week, out of nowhere, I heard a voice crackling through the speaker. At first, I assumed it was picking up interference from a neighbor's monitor. I ignored it, but then I heard something that froze my blood. "Daddy, help me." I rushed to Oliver's room. He was fast asleep, curled up under his blankets. I checked the monitor, but it was turned off. I convinced myself I had imagined it. The next night, it happened again. The same static, the same soft, trembling voice. "Daddy, why won't you help me?" I turned on the baby monitor screen. The image was grainy, distorted by static, but I could make out a figure standing in the middle of Oliver's room. I sprinted down the hall, heart pounding. I threw the door open. Nothing. Just Oliver, sleeping soundly. But when I stepped inside, the air felt wrong, thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I checked the closet, under the bed, every corner of the room. Nothing. The next morning, I told my wife about it. She laughed, saying I was just exhausted from work. But Oliver overheard. His face went pale. "You saw him too?" A chill ran through me. I knelt beside him, keeping my voice calm. "Saw who, buddy?" Oliver hesitated. Then he whispered, "The boy who cries at night." I didn't sleep that night. I sat outside Oliver's room, listening. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the monitor flickered to life. The screen showed Oliver's room. But this time, he wasn't alone. A boy stood beside his bed, small, gaunt, his face blurred by static. He turned and looked directly into the camera. I ran inside. The second I flipped the light switch, Oliver shot up, screaming, "He doesn't want you here." I grabbed him, holding him close as he sobbed. I didn't know what to say. What was happening to my son? Desperate for answers, I checked the attic where we had stored the baby monitor. That's when I found the box. It wasn't ours. It was old, covered in dust, the cardboard brittle. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings about a missing child. A boy. His face was blurred in the old photos, but the description made my stomach drop. Age 5. Last seen in this house. I turned over the last article, my hands shaking. Scrawled in faded ink were 3 words: "He's still here." That night, I didn't let Oliver sleep in his room. I set up a cot in ours, keeping him close. At 3:12 a.m., I heard it, a soft, heart-wrenching sob. It wasn't coming from the monitor this time. It was coming from the hallway. I locked the bedroom door. My wife stirred, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't answer. I just stood there listening. The crying grew louder, closer. Then something scraped against the door. I pressed my hand against Oliver's back, feeling his small, steady breaths. Then, from the other side of the door, a whisper, "Daddy, why won't you help me?" I never opened the door, and by morning, the sounds were gone. But the baby monitor still turns on at 3:12 a.m. And every night, the boy gets closer that I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The weight of the discovery in the attic, Oliver's words, and that thing outside our door clawed at my mind like rusted nails scraping bone. By morning, my wife acted like nothing had happened. She didn't hear the crying. She didn't hear the whisper. She looked at me with concern, brushing it off as exhaustion. But Oliver knew. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his cereal, not eating. When I asked if he was okay, he barely whispered he's angry. That was the moment I knew. We weren't dealing with some overactive imagination or a faulty baby monitor. Something was in this house, and it wanted Oliver. That night, I made up my mind. I wasn't waiting for whatever it was to take another step closer. I stayed up, staring at the clock, gripping a baseball bat with white-knuckled hands. 3:12 a.m. The baby monitor crackled to life. Static, then breathing, then the sound of feet dragging across the floor. The screen flickered. My heart slammed against my ribs. The feed was from inside our bedroom. Oliver was in his cot still. My wife was beside me, asleep. But there, at the foot of the bed, was the boy. I snapped my head up, expecting to see him standing there in the darkness. But there was nothing. Only the glow of the monitor screen illuminating his warped, static-covered face. And then, he moved, not on the screen. In the room, I felt it before I saw it, the shift in the air, the cold that sucked the breath from my lungs. Oliver let out a gasping sob, curling into himself. "Daddy, make him stop." I threw the monitor across the room. The screen shattered. The second it hit the ground, the air lightened. The crushing pressure in my chest disappeared. Oliver stopped crying. But before I could move, before I could even think, asterisk, asterisk, a single knock, asterisk, asterisk came from inside the closet. I don't remember getting to my feet. I don't remember grabbing Oliver or shaking my wife awake. I only remember opening the closet door. Empty. Just coats, shoes, and an old wooden floor. But I could feel it. That same pressure, like the house itself was holding its breath. Then I noticed something along the floorboards. Deep, frantic, like someone had been dragged. And then my foot hit something. A loose plank. I knelt down and pried it open. What I saw underneath stole the breath from my lungs. Tiny bones. A child's skull. The baby monitor crackled. The shattered screen flickered. And through the static, the voice returned. "You found me." I don't remember screaming, but my wife said I did. We left that night, taking Oliver and whatever we could fit into the car. We never went back. We never sold the house. I don't even know if it's still standing. But sometimes, at 3:12 a.m., I wake up to static. And I swear, I hear a boy crying. I never thought I'd be afraid of my own child. It started small, Little things I brushed off, his toys moving to different spots, doors left slightly open when I was sure I'd closed them. Then, there were the whispers. Not the kind you imagine in the dark, but real, breathy words escaping my son's lips when he was fast asleep. At first, I told myself he was just dreaming, kids talk in their sleep. But one night, I heard him say something that made my blood run cold. "Daddy doesn't need to know yet." I stood frozen in his doorway, the soft glow of his night light casting shadows across his tiny frame. I wanted to wake him, shake him, demand to know who he was talking to. Instead, I backed away. The next morning, he acted normal, giggling, eating breakfast, watching cartoons. But I couldn't forget what I'd heard. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Then I saw the drawings. He had always loved coloring, but these were different. Strange, dark scribbles. A man with hollow eyes standing at the foot of his bed. A figure lurking behind me while I washed dishes. In one picture, he had drawn himself, but his mouth was sewn shut. I asked him who the man was. He just giggled and said, "You'll see soon." That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every rustling of the trees outside sent shivers down my spine. Around 3 a.m., I heard something move in his room. I grabbed the baby monitor and turned up the volume. Breathing slow, deep, but it wasn't his. Then a faint shuffling sound. My pulse pounded in my ears. I stared at the grainy screen, expecting to see him tossing in bed. But he wasn't in bed. He was standing in the corner, facing the wall. I ran to his room and flipped on the light. He turned to look at me, eyes half-lidded, his lips curled into a sleepy, eerie smile. "He's almost ready, Daddy." I wanted to scream, to grab him and run, but my body wouldn't move. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. Then, the closet door creaked open. I don't know what I expected to see. A pile of clothes? Some forgotten toys? Instead, there was a chair. A small wooden chair I had never seen before, perfectly centered, facing the bed. My son climbed back under his blankets like nothing had happened. I stood there, staring at the chair, my heart hammering. The next day, I threw it out, hauled it to the curb, made sure the garbage truck took it away. That night, I checked his room a dozen times. Everything was normal. No whispers, no drawings, no eerie smiles. Just my boy, sleeping peacefully. Until 3 a.m. A single knock sounded from inside his closet. I reached for the door, but before I could open it, "Daddy, don't. He's here now." I don't remember what happened next. I woke up hours later, in my bed, my head pounding. I ran to his room. He was there, awake, waiting, and next to his bed, the chair was back. I packed our bags that morning and left. I don't know what it was, what had attached itself to my son, but I knew we had to get away. That was 3 years ago. He doesn't remember any of it. Or at least, that's what he tells me. But last night, I heard him whispering again. And this morning, there was another chair. I grabbed the chair and threw it outside. This time, I didn't just leave it at the curb. I took an axe to it, splintering the wood into jagged pieces, making sure there was nothing left but dust and broken fragments. My hands shook as I burned the remains in a metal barrel behind the house, watching the flames consume every last trace of it. But that night, my son woke me up. He stood at the edge of my bed, staring. His small chest rose and fell in slow, steady breaths, but there was something wrong with his eyes. They looked distant. "Daddy, he's mad at you." I sat up so fast my head spun. "Who's mad?" His face twisted, lips trembling like he was trying to fight something. His fingers clenched into tiny fists, his whole body shaking. Then his mouth opened, like something inside him was trying to crawl out. I grabbed his shoulders. "Son, wake up!" His body stiffened, then went limp in my arms. I held him, rocking him like I used to when he was a baby, whispering to him, telling him it was okay. Eventually, his breathing evened out, and I tucked him back into bed. For the next few nights, nothing happened. The house was eerily quiet. almost as if whatever had been tormenting us had finally left. Until the last night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. My son was standing there again, but this time he wasn't alone. A chair sat in the hallway behind him, identical to the one I had destroyed. He stepped aside, his little hand motioning toward it, and whispered, "He wants to talk to you." The air around me turned thick, like I was being dragged underwater. My limbs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then from the chair came a sound, a long, slow exhale. My son's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. And then the bedroom door slammed shut, and everything went black.